If you still believe surrender buys mercy, you have not been paying attention. The words hung over every military frequency in known space just seconds before the largest live broadcast in galactic history switched to the bridge of the Terran flagship Resolute. More than 12,000 cameras, drones, and diplomatic feeds focused on a single image. The flagship of Earth sat completely surrounded. Thousands of warships bearing the black and gold crest of Warlord Kaler Voss formed a perfect ring across the stars, their formation so massive it seemed to erase the sky itself. Every analyst in the galaxy had already written the same headline. Humanity had finally run out of options. On the Resolute, nobody cheered. Nobody panicked. Crew members quietly worked their stations with the practiced rhythm of people who had spent years preparing for impossible days. Lieutenant Megan Carter glanced toward the tactical display and swallowed hard. "Sir," she said softly, "every escape corridor is gone." Commander Nathan Brooks stood near the forward observation window with a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, calm, wearing the same faded wedding band he had refused to remove since his wife passed away nearly a decade earlier. He studied the enemy fleet the way a contractor might inspect an old bridge before deciding where to begin repairs. There was no anger in his face, no excitement, just quiet attention. "I know," he answered. His voice barely rose above the steady hum of the bridge. An alert chimed across every console. Incoming transmission. Priority Alpha. The massive holographic display came alive, revealing Warlord Kaler Voss seated upon a command platform surrounded by armored officers. His confidence filled the room before he even spoke. "Commander Brooks," Voss announced, his deep voice echoing across every public broadcast. "You have 5 minutes to surrender your fleet, your colonies, and your government. Refuse, and the Terran Alliance will cease to exist as an independent power before this hour ends." Every microphone on the Resolute remained silent. Somewhere across the bridge, someone slowly exhaled. Megan looked toward Nathan, waiting for instructions. Around the galaxy, billions waited for the human commander to beg, bargain, or threaten. Instead, Nathan lowered his coffee mug onto the navigation console with a soft click. He looked at the impossible wall of enemy ships one more time. Then he laughed. It was not loud. It was not forced. It sounded almost relieved, like a mechanic discovering the missing part to a machine that had been driving him crazy for months. The bridge crew exchanged confused looks. Even the alien officers on Voss's flagship stopped moving. Nathan smiled just enough for the cameras to catch it. "Finally," he said. Silence swallowed the transmission. Warlord Voss narrowed his eyes. "Explain yourself." Nathan ignored the question. Instead, he turned toward Megan. "Would you remind me," he asked in the same relaxed tone he used during routine inspections, "how many civilian evacuation convoys cleared the sector?" Megan blinked, surprised by the question. "All of them, sir. The last convoy crossed the line 18 minutes ago." Nathan nodded once. "Good." He looked back toward the screen. "Then we can have an honest conversation." Nobody understood why those words made the senior officers on the Resolute straighten in their chairs. Nobody watching the broadcast knew why several human captains quietly removed sealed envelopes from locked compartments beneath their consoles. Across the enemy fleet, commanders mistook the calm for denial. Analysts called it psychological collapse. Commentators predicted humanity's final speech. Only one person aboard the Resolute knew the truth, and she felt it the moment Nathan's expression changed. The smile disappeared. His eyes became colder than the stars outside. For the first time that morning, Commander Nathan Brooks looked exactly like a man who had finally been given permission to stop waiting. 3 days earlier, the bridge of the Resolute looked almost ordinary. There were no emergency alarms, no hostile fleets filling the stars, and no reporters waiting for history to unfold. Commander Nathan Brooks walked through the morning shift carrying a paper cup of coffee from the tiny galley tucked behind the operations deck. He greeted every crew member by name because that was simply how he led. "Morning, Olivia. How is your father doing after the surgery?" he asked without slowing down. Lieutenant Olivia Grant smiled. "He is already trying to mow the lawn, sir." Nathan shook his head with a quiet laugh. "That sounds like every stubborn father in America." He continued toward the tactical room, where Captain Daniel Hayes and Commander Rachel Morgan were already waiting. The wall display showed dozens of star systems glowing in different colors. Supply routes, civilian settlements, mining stations, and patrol lines stretched across the map like veins. Daniel folded his arms. Long-range reconnaissance confirms another concentration of Voss's fleet near the Orion corridor. Rachel zoomed in on the projection. He is not hiding it anymore. He wants us to see everything. Nathan studied the map for nearly a minute without speaking. Anyone who did not know him would have mistaken the silence for hesitation. His officers knew better. He never rushed the first answer because the first answer was usually the one the enemy expected. "What do you think?" Rachel finally asked. Nathan pointed toward a seemingly unimportant shipping lane. "Everyone keeps watching the warships. Nobody is watching the families trying to get home." Daniel frowned. "You think civilians are the real objective?" Nathan nodded. "Pressure people long enough, and they stop thinking clearly. Voss understands that." He took another sip of coffee before continuing. "So we do the opposite. We keep people moving, keep supplies flowing, and make sure every child sleeping on a transport ship wakes up believing tomorrow is still normal." Rachel looked at him carefully. "You sound like you already know where this ends." Nathan looked through the observation window toward the quiet stars. "I know where he wants it to end." He paused for a moment. "The question is whether he realizes he is following someone else's schedule." Neither officer asked another question. They had served under Nathan long enough to recognize that tone. It meant he had already reached a decision days before anyone else knew there was a decision to make. Later that afternoon, Nathan sat alone inside his ready room. The office was simple. No expensive decorations. No trophies. Just a family photograph, a worn baseball from his son's Little League days, and a shelf filled with history books. He picked up the photograph for a moment. His wife smiled back at him from a camping trip years earlier, standing beside their teenage son with the Rocky Mountains behind them. There were days he still expected to hear her voice telling him to stop carrying the weight of the entire world by himself. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Rachel stepped inside carrying a classified folder. Intelligence finished the latest projections. Nathan accepted the folder without opening it. "How bad? If Voss attacks exactly where everyone expects, we lose a third of our defensive network." Nathan finally opened the file. He scanned each page, then quietly closed it again. "He will not attack where everyone expects." Rachel looked puzzled. "You sound awfully certain." Nathan leaned back in his chair. "Because men like Kaler Voss do not chase victories. They chase moments that make legends. He wants every camera in the galaxy watching when humanity falls." Rachel slowly realized what Nathan meant. "So he is waiting for the perfect stage." Nathan gave a small nod. "Exactly." He stood and walked toward the window again. "Now all we have to do is make sure the stage belongs to us instead of him." De La Fan 3, Teep NOI Truck Teep Fan 2. The next 48 hours confused every intelligence agency in known space. Earth pulled destroyers away from 3 heavily fortified frontier systems without offering any explanation. 2 orbital defense stations quietly powered down. A military shipyard near the Perseus corridor appeared almost abandoned, with only a skeleton maintenance crew visible through long-range surveillance. Inside the command center of the Black Legion flagship, Warlord Kaler Voss watched the reports arrive one after another. His senior strategist, Marshal Drevik, expanded a holographic star map across the room. "Their outer defenses continue to shrink," Drevik reported. "Our observers have confirmed another withdrawal from the Vega line." Voss smiled. "Fear always follows mathematics. They finally understand the numbers." Another officer stepped forward. "Commander Brooks has ordered additional civilian convoys away from the border sectors. Merchant traffic is increasing while military traffic continues to decline." Several alien officers laughed quietly. To them, the pattern was obvious. Humanity was making room for refugees because they had already accepted defeat. Voss folded his hands behind his back and admired the projection. Every new report reinforced exactly what he wanted to believe. "The human commander has become cautious," he said. "He is protecting civilians because he knows he cannot protect territory." Meanwhile, nearly 200 light-years away, the atmosphere aboard the Resolute could not have been more different. Lieutenant Megan Carter stood over a navigation display, looking increasingly frustrated. "Sir, I have reviewed the deployment schedule 6 times," she admitted. "We are giving up positions that took years to build. Every academy instructor I ever had would call this a disaster." Nathan Brooks looked up from a stack of logistics reports. They probably would. Megan hesitated before asking the question that had been bothering her for days. Then why are we doing it? Nathan walked toward the star map and pointed to the bright clusters representing Earth's old defensive network. Tell me what you see. Strongholds. Megan answered immediately. Supply depots. Defensive lines. Nathan nodded. That is exactly what Voss sees too. He touched the display, and dozens of icons disappeared. Now what do you see? Megan frowned. Weakness. Nathan smiled faintly. Good. Then the illusion is working. She stared at him, slowly beginning to understand. You want him to believe we are retreating. Nathan did not answer right away. He looked around the operations room where engineers, navigators, and communications officers quietly handled thousands of routine tasks that looked completely ordinary to anyone watching from the outside. Every commander has a favorite story, he finally said. Some believe they always outfight the enemy. Others believe they always outthink them. Kaylor Voss believes every opponent eventually becomes afraid. Megan crossed her arms. So if we refuse to look afraid? Nathan gently shook his head. No. If we refuse, he becomes cautious. That is not what we need. She blinked. You actually want him to think he has already won. Nathan looked out through the observation window where maintenance crews drifted between docked vessels in silent formation. Confidence is heavier than armor, he said quietly. Once someone carries enough of it, they stop checking the ground beneath their feet. Across the galaxy, Voss approved the next phase of his advance without requesting additional reconnaissance. Human withdrawals continued exactly as expected. Empty stations remained empty. Silent shipyards remained silent. Every report confirmed his conclusions. None of his advisors realized they had stopped asking the most dangerous question in warfare. Not where the enemy had gone, but why Commander Nathan Brooks seemed strangely comfortable letting the entire galaxy believe that humanity was slowly backing itself into a corner. 5 minutes sounded generous to everyone watching the live broadcast. To Commander Nathan Brooks, it sounded almost luxurious. Warlord Kaylor Voss leaned forward on the towering display, his expression carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had already rehearsed his victory speech. Your time has already begun, Voss said. Use it wisely. Nathan glanced toward the chronometer mounted above the bridge. 4 minutes and 53 seconds remained. Lieutenant Carter, he said, please confirm civilian traffic. Megan immediately checked her console. Final convoy has entered safe space. Medical transports are accounted for. Colony evacuation ships have cleared the corridor. No civilians remain inside the engagement zone. Nathan nodded once. Excellent. Voss frowned. That is your priority? You are counting refugee ships instead of preparing surrender documents. Nathan looked back at the screen. I do not like leaving unfinished business. The answer puzzled nearly everyone listening. Across the bridge, Captain Daniel Hayes quietly walked to Nathan's side and lowered his voice. All confirmation signals are waiting for your authorization. Nathan did not even look at him. Not yet. Daniel gave a small nod and returned to his station without another question. Years of serving together had taught him something every young officer eventually learned. Nathan never delayed because he was uncertain. He delayed because timing was part of the plan. On the enemy flagship, Marshal Drevik studied the human bridge through magnified sensors. Commander Brooks appears unusually relaxed, he observed. Voss dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. He has accepted reality. Some leaders become emotional. Others become strangely calm. Either way, they all surrender when the numbers become impossible. The countdown continued. For minutes. 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Across every human vessel, sealed authentication envelopes were quietly opened. No speeches were made. No alarms sounded. Officers simply read a single page, signed digital acknowledgments, and locked the documents back into their consoles. Every movement appeared routine. Every face remained composed. Megan watched the confirmations appear one after another. She finally leaned closer to Nathan. Sir, every task group has acknowledged receipt. Nathan answered without taking his eyes off the stars. Good. They are asking if Phase 1 should begin. Nathan slowly shook his head. Not until every eye in the galaxy is looking exactly where Voss wants them looking. She understood immediately. This broadcast was never just a negotiation. It had become the stage Nathan predicted days earlier. Every government, every trading alliance, every neutral observer was watching one location. Nobody was paying attention to anything else. On the enemy bridge, another intelligence officer approached Voss. No hidden fleets detected. No unusual energy signatures. Human communications remain almost completely silent. Voss smiled with visible satisfaction. Silence is what defeat sounds like. Back aboard the Resolute, Nathan quietly reached into his uniform pocket and unfolded a small handwritten note. Megan recognized the familiar handwriting. It belonged to his late wife. Nathan read it for only a second before carefully folding it again. He took a slow breath. Fear was still there. Responsibility was still there. Neither had ever disappeared. He had simply learned years ago that neither emotion was allowed to make decisions for him. The bridge lights reflected softly across the observation window as the final minute appeared on the countdown clock. Nathan placed one hand on the command console. Now, he said calmly, let us see whether he notices what has been missing this entire time. The final 60 seconds felt strangely ordinary aboard the Resolute. No one raised their voice. No one rushed across the bridge. The steady rhythm of keyboards, navigation updates, and quiet acknowledgments continued as though it were another routine patrol. That calm made Lieutenant Megan Carter more nervous than any alarm ever could. She watched the countdown slip under 1 minute, then turned toward Commander Nathan Brooks. Sir, every task group is standing by. Nobody has broken radio silence. Nathan rested both hands on the edge of the command table. That means they trust the plan. Megan hesitated before asking the question she had been carrying since the operation began. Do you? Nathan smiled faintly, but it was tired rather than confident. Every commander who tells you he has no doubts is either lying or dangerous. He looked around the bridge, meeting the eyes of officers who had served with him for years. I have doubts every single day. I simply do not let them make decisions. His words settled over the room. They were not a speech. They sounded more like something a father might say at the kitchen table after a long week. Captain Daniel Hayes quietly stepped beside him and placed a secure data tablet on the console. Final readiness report, he said. If we move forward, there is no changing course. Nathan opened the file. Every line represented real people. Pilots waiting inside cramped cockpits. Engineers monitoring reactors. Medical teams preparing emergency stations. Thousands of men and women had accepted assignments without knowing the complete picture because they trusted one man's judgment. Nathan closed the report and let out a slow breath. For just a moment, he remembered another bridge years earlier. Different ship, different war. A younger version of himself had argued against a reckless assault that cost friends he still thought about whenever the room became quiet. He had promised himself afterward that he would never gamble with lives simply to win glory. If he ever ordered people into danger again, it would only be because every other option had already been exhausted. Megan noticed him staring at nothing. Sir. Nathan looked back at the present and nodded. Thank you. I am here. Across the enormous wall display, Warlord Kaler Voss folded his arms. 30 seconds, Commander. I expected more resistance from a species that speaks so often about courage. Nathan answered calmly. Courage is not measured by how loudly someone talks. Voss laughed. Then history will remember today as the moment humanity finally accepted reality. Nathan said nothing. He simply glanced toward Daniel. Without another word, Daniel entered a single authorization code. Green confirmation lights quietly appeared across every station on the bridge. No engines flared. No weapons charged. Nothing dramatic happened. That was exactly the point. On the enemy flagship, Marshal Drevik frowned at his tactical display. Warlord, I am receiving routine maintenance signals from several abandoned human facilities. Voss barely looked at him. Ignore them. They are background noise. Drevik nodded, although something about the pattern continued to bother him. The signals were ordinary. Too ordinary. They appeared almost synchronized, as if hundreds of unrelated systems had suddenly awakened for reasons nobody could explain. Back aboard the Resolute, Nathan watched the countdown reach 10 seconds. He spoke so quietly that only his senior officers heard him. Sometimes the hardest part of leadership is waiting until everyone else is absolutely certain they understand the situation. The final numbers disappeared from the display. Every observer across the galaxy believed they were about to witness humanity's surrender. Nathan gently pressed his thumb against the authorization panel and whispered, "Now they are looking exactly where we wanted them to look." The first alert did not come from a weapons officer. It came from an exhausted sensor technician sitting 3 decks below the bridge. "Commander," the young specialist said over the secure channel, "I think our long-range array is malfunctioning." Nathan Brooks looked toward Lieutenant Megan Carter. "Bring it up." A new layer appeared across the massive tactical display. At first glance, nothing seemed different. Then small amber icons began appearing one by one in places every military analyst had ignored for weeks. Dead shipyards, decommissioned listening stations, empty supply depots, facilities the entire galaxy believed humanity had quietly abandoned. Megan leaned closer to the screen. "Those stations are transmitting." Nathan nodded. "They never stopped existing. They only stopped asking to be noticed." Across the battlefield, Marshal Drevik suddenly stiffened. His own tactical display flashed with hundreds of identical notifications. Passive communication relays were coming online throughout the sector. None of them carried weapon signatures. None of them showed military formations. Yet every new signal expanded into a web that connected another and another, until invisible lines stretched across nearly the entire region. "Warlord," Drevik said carefully, "I recommend we investigate these transmissions before proceeding." Kaler Voss barely glanced away from the human flagship. "Maintenance systems. Civilian infrastructure. Nothing more." "Perhaps," Drevik answered. "But they all activated within the same 30-second window." That finally caught Voss's attention. He stepped toward the tactical table just as another officer spoke. "Long-range navigation reports unusual gravitational reference updates throughout the sector. Automated route calculations are changing." Voss frowned. "Changing how?" "The safest escape vectors are disappearing." Silence settled over the enemy command deck. Meanwhile, aboard the Resolute, no one celebrated. Nathan folded his hands behind his back while Captain Daniel Hayes quietly monitored the incoming reports. "Phase 1 complete," Daniel said. Every relay responded exactly on schedule. Megan looked from one screen to another, still trying to understand what she was seeing. "Sir, these are not weapons." "No," Nathan replied. "Weapons are loud. Preparation is usually quiet." She watched the expanding network continue to grow. "What are they actually doing?" Nathan touched one glowing point on the display. "For 20 years we built supply stations, navigation beacons, emergency communication hubs, rescue platforms, weather monitors, and civilian infrastructure across this frontier." He tapped another point. "The galaxy saw ordinary construction projects." Another point. Voss saw abandoned investments. Then Nathan connected the glowing dots with one slow movement of his finger. The bridge display instantly transformed into a complete strategic picture. Gas giant gravity wells, stable jump corridors, hidden refueling locations, emergency logistics caches. Everything fit together like pieces of a puzzle that only humanity had ever bothered to assemble. Megan's eyes widened. "He followed the roads we built." Nathan gave a quiet smile. "Exactly. Every fleet needs fuel, navigation references, maintenance windows, and predictable routes. We spent 2 decades deciding where those routes would eventually lead." At that same moment, confused reports poured into the Black Legion Command Center. "Navigation predicts increased congestion if we attempt a coordinated withdrawal. Several fleet groups are requesting alternate formations. Automated routing systems are producing conflicting recommendations." None of the reports described an attack. There were no explosions, no mysterious superweapons, and no impossible technology. There was only growing uncertainty spreading through a force that had expected everything to remain simple. Nathan watched the enemy formation hesitate for the first time. "People think wars are won by the strongest fleet," he said quietly. "Most of the time they are won years earlier by whoever quietly decides where everyone else will eventually have to stand." Megan looked at the enormous alien armada frozen in place, no longer advancing with the same certainty. For the first time since the crisis began, it was not humanity that appeared surrounded. It was confidence itself that had started running out of room. Marshal Drevik broke the silence first. "Warlord, our outer formations are requesting permission to reposition." Kaler Voss stared at the tactical display, his confidence beginning to harden into irritation. "Permission denied. Hold formation. The humans are trying to create confusion where none exists." Another officer stepped forward. "Sir, our navigation network has recalculated the sector 4 times in the last 90 seconds. Every recommended withdrawal route now overlaps with civilian logistics corridors built by Earth decades ago. Voss narrowed his eyes. Then ignore the recommendations. We already have. The problem is every manual calculation produces the same result. On the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Nathan Brooks quietly watched the enemy fleet slow itself down. No shots had been fired. No dramatic maneuver had unfolded. Thousands of alien ships simply hesitated because every captain suddenly realized someone else had already designed the roads beneath them. Lieutenant Megan Carter looked from one screen to another. They are starting to question each other. Nathan nodded. That was always the first objective. Captain Daniel Hayes looked over the latest reports. Phase 2 is ready. Nathan folded his arms. Open the channel. Seconds later, the enormous image of Kaylor Voss appeared once again across the bridge. This time, the Warlord did not look amused. Commander Brooks, he said, whatever trick you believe you are playing, it changes nothing. My fleet still outnumbers yours. Nathan smiled politely. I never argued with your math. Voss leaned forward. Then explain your confidence. Nathan looked past the camera, as though he were checking something outside the window. Do you remember the first thing I said when you demanded surrender? Voss remained silent. You laughed, Marshal Drevik answered. Nathan nodded once. Yes. He looked directly into the camera. You have spent years chasing every Terran withdrawal, every abandoned station, every empty depot. You believed each one proved we were becoming weaker. He paused just long enough for the words to settle. I laughed because you finally gathered every fleet I needed into one place. The command deck aboard the Black Legion flagship became perfectly still. No one spoke. Even Voss's expression changed for the briefest moment. It was not fear. It was recognition. He suddenly understood that he had been reacting to Nathan's decisions for months instead of forcing humanity to react to his own. Impossible, Voss said quietly. Nathan gently shook his head. No. Predictable. Daniel Hayes looked at the incoming telemetry and smiled for the first time all day. Sir, they are beginning to split command authority. Nathan did not celebrate. That is what happens when certainty disappears. Reports flooded the enemy bridge. Individual fleet commanders requested independent navigation authority. Supply groups questioned previous orders. Long-range escorts asked for new coordinates. Nobody wanted to make the wrong move, and every additional question slowed the entire armada even further. Megan watched the tactical display change color as dozens of alien formations drifted slightly out of alignment. They are still stronger than we are, she whispered. Nathan answered without taking his eyes off the stars. Strength is only useful when everyone moves together. He reached toward the command console and rested one hand against its surface. Now we find out whether Kaylor Voss built an empire around loyalty or around certainty. Across the communication channel, the Warlord stood motionless, his officers waiting for immediate orders that did not come as quickly as before. For the first time since the crisis began, the silence belonged to him instead of humanity. No one remembered who gave the first order to slow down. Later, every officer aboard the Black Legion would insist it had been someone else. That was the strange thing about confidence once it cracked. It rarely collapsed all at once. It disappeared one decision at a time. Marshal Drevik studied the tactical display with growing concern. Warlord, Fleet Groups 7 and 9 are requesting independent navigation authority. They believe remaining in their current positions increases logistical risk. Kaylor Voss answered without looking away from the projection. Denied. Another officer immediately spoke. Supply Command is reporting congestion at 3 primary resupply corridors. Denied. A third voice followed. Long-range escorts are asking permission to establish alternate jump lanes. Voss closed his eyes for half a second. Denied. The bridge became noticeably quieter. Every refusal solved one problem while creating another. On the Resolute, Nathan Brooks watched the same reports arrive from listening stations scattered across the sector. Captain Daniel Hayes looked almost surprised. They are arguing with each other. Nathan nodded. Large organizations do not fall apart because people stop believing in themselves. They fall apart because people stop believing everyone else knows what they are doing. Lieutenant Megan Carter looked toward the enormous alien formation drifting ever so slightly out of synchronization. They still have enough ships to overwhelm us if they commit. Nathan smiled. Only if every captain believes the captain beside them will make the same decision at the same moment. Daniel checked another incoming transmission. Several neutral governments are requesting clarification. They cannot understand why the Black Legion has stopped advancing. Nathan folded his hands behind his back. Send them the updated navigation map. Megan looked over. That is all. That is enough. Minutes later, civilian analysts, independent observers, and military academies across the galaxy began studying the same data. They noticed something the Black Legion had ignored for years. Every humanitarian station Earth had built, every rescue platform, every emergency beacon, every supply depot and navigation relay had quietly become part of a single support network stretching across the frontier. Humanity had not spent decades building military strongholds. Humanity had built the roads, fuel stops, communication hubs, and emergency services that everyone eventually depended upon. Without realizing it, Voss had marched his empire deep inside infrastructure designed, maintained, and understood better by Earth than anyone else. A young communications officer looked up from her console. Commander, public opinion is changing fast. They are saying this was never about firepower. Nathan answered softly. It never was. Another secure message appeared from one of the forward observation teams. No hostile maneuver detected. Enemy formations continued delaying major decisions while awaiting revised command guidance. Daniel let out a quiet breath. They are waiting for someone to restore certainty. Nathan looked through the bridge windows toward the endless stars. And certainty is the one thing nobody can give them now. The open channel suddenly activated again. Kaler Voss appeared, but this time there was no trace of celebration in his voice. Commander Brooks, he said evenly, if your objective was to make me hesitate, congratulations. You have succeeded. Nathan shook his head. Hesitation was never my objective. Voss frowned. Then what was? Nathan's answer came without the slightest hint of triumph. I wanted everyone else to see that the strongest fleet in the galaxy only looked unstoppable as long as nobody questioned its direction. The channel closed. Neither commander spoke another word. Across hundreds of worlds, billions of viewers continued staring at their screens. They had expected to witness the surrender of humanity. Instead, they were watching something far more unsettling. The most powerful warlord in known space had discovered that control could disappear long before the first battle ever began. The silence lasted almost a full minute before Warlord Kaler Voss finally spoke to his fleet. His voice was steady, but everyone listening could hear something that had not been there before. Care. Every order he gave was now followed by another question, another confirmation, another request for verification. The unstoppable advance that had carried his empire across dozens of star systems slowed to the pace of uncertainty. On the bridge of the Resolute, no one celebrated. Lieutenant Megan Carter looked around at her fellow officers. Some quietly leaned back in their chairs. Others simply closed their eyes for a moment, relieved that another impossible day had not become a tragedy. Captain Daniel Hayes finally broke the silence. Sir, several fleet groups are pulling back to defensive positions. They are requesting diplomatic channels instead of military escalation. Nathan Brooks nodded as if he had expected nothing else. Open every channel. Daniel looked surprised. Everyone. Everyone, Nathan repeated. If someone wants to talk instead of making another mistake, we answer. Across the fleet, human communication arrays came alive. Rescue frequencies were reopened. Navigation assistance was restored. Civilian traffic advisories resumed broadcasting exactly as they had before the crisis. The same network the galaxy had mistaken for weakness quietly returned to doing what it had always been built to do, helping people find their way home. Hours later, representatives from neutral systems replayed the recordings again and again. Military colleges studied the operation. Historians debated when the turning point had truly happened. Some claimed it was when the communication network activated. Others believed it was when the alien fleet hesitated. A few insisted everything changed the moment Nathan laughed. They were all wrong. The real turning point had happened years earlier, when humanity chose to spend its time building roads instead of monuments, rescue stations instead of symbols, and trust instead of fear. Megan walked beside Nathan as the bridge slowly returned to its normal routine. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. When you laughed, were you really certain this would work? Nathan looked through the observation window at the stars that suddenly seemed peaceful again. He smiled, the same quiet smile that had confused an entire galaxy. No. Megan looked genuinely surprised. Nathan continued, I was certain about something else. What was that? He rested one hand on the cool metal railing. That panic has never improved a decision. Somebody had to stay calm long enough for everyone else to think clearly. Megan nodded slowly, carrying those words with her. Years later, when she would command her own flagship, she would remember that conversation far more clearly than any tactical map. Before leaving the bridge, Nathan took the folded note from his pocket one last time. He smiled at the familiar handwriting, then carefully placed it back inside his uniform. He looked across the busy bridge where engineers, navigators, and young officers had already returned to ordinary work, and he quietly said, almost to himself, that is enough for today. Long after the fleets had gone their separate ways, children across human colonies would hear stories about the commander who laughed when everyone expected him to surrender. Most would grow up believing the lesson was about courage. The older they became, the more they realized the story meant something different. Real strength is rarely the loudest voice in the room. It is the quiet confidence to prepare when nobody is watching, the patience to wait when everyone demands immediate action, and the wisdom to remember that the greatest victories are the ones that leave the most people alive to build a better tomorrow.